our culture, the way we're supposed to find happiness, it was like something that I was lacking. I wasn't able to find that fulfillment, that happiness. And so for me, what that led me to do in my search for happiness and fulfillment and purpose was, I ended up kind of doing what our culture said in the beginning. I pursued what our culture would call the, party life, the college life. And I went really hard in that. I would go from Ohio to South Beach, Miami, to Dallas, Texas. I would attend, exclusive events, exclusive parties, big parties. And the more and more I did them, the more I realized that it was actually kind of getting boring, that it wasn't as fun, it wasn't as fulfilling. At the end of the day, or the end of the night, I was kind of just filled with regrets, boredom, just all I had left to remember that night was a hangover. There wasn't actually much left in those nights. And so I ended up kind of moving on from that. I ended up moving on from that crazy party life, and I started pursuing sports. During that time, I had really dedicated myself to boxing. I'd been doing it for like a decade. I had pursued boxing so much to the point where I actually was offered a professional contract. This one point in my life was like a movie. It was 2 weeks of just crazy life that you would see in a movie. I had boxing in which I won fights, and then I went on a crazy partying streak for like 2 weeks, flying down to South Beach, flying back to Ohio, partying every day, drinking every day, drugs, whatever you want to call it, uppers, downers, stimulants, enhancers, one night stands, things like that. And it was everything that a man of our culture could want. Everything our culture, everything you see in the movies was like, this is a man, this is him, this is what it means to be a man. I found that at the end of that night, if that was the peak, right? That was the absolute peak, that I was disappointed with it. I was like, this is what our culture has to offer. This is supposed to be the best. And yet it wasn't enough. It was ultimately really disheartening. I felt really lost. This is what our culture promised was good. This is what society said was good, and yet it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't the happiness, the satisfaction I thought that I was going to get from it wasn't nearly enough. And that was hard because the times where I felt those feelings before was simply just kind of pushed away by, you just need to do it more. You haven't won enough. You haven't drank enough. You haven't partied enough. You haven't slept around enough. And yet, that was it. If there was no getting better than that 2 weeks, and it wasn't that. It wasn't everything it was supposed to be. And so that messed me up, because I realized that I was gonna die one day, and what would I have to show for it? All the things I experienced, they would fade away. All the achievements I had, the medals I had, whatever it was, they would fade into nothing. They would turn to dust. I would turn to dust, and that freaked me out. That scared me a lot, was dying. I lost so much sleep for months, staying awake at night, thinking about that, thinking about, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What about death? Like, is this really what it all is? And that fear of dying led me to really want to find the correct way to live. But I didn't know how to do that. And so the first thing I decided I was going to do was simply by being like a kinder person. During that time, I really had disdain for people. Like, I honestly viewed myself as better than a lot of people. And I had terrible relationships. My life was very hectic based on the party life and things like that. And so I was like, maybe the first thing I should do is kind of chill it. But at the end of the day, after a while, I still realized that I felt like I was missing something. It still didn't answer the bigger questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What about death? Is this really the way it's supposed to be? And I thought about religion. I definitely thought about it. But the thing that stopped me from religion for a while was my experience with it. My experience with religion and my opinions of it was that it was for like self-righteous hypocrites and people who were weak, people who spewed moral pleasantries but couldn't keep them, and then people who couldn't do anything on their own. And I was neither of those people at that time. I was like, I know I'm a bad person. I know I have done much wrong. And so why would I lie about that? And I also was too much of like a man to admit that I needed help. Like, I'm not weak like these other people. I don't need people's help. I can walk on my own 2 feet. I can carry the weight of the world if I have to. And so for me, the taste in my mouth was, why would I want to be a part of this? Why would I want anything to do with this? If this is how they're supposed to treat people, then this is what God is supposed to be like. And this is telling me that God, if there is a God, wants nothing to do with me, that I'm too far gone, that, I am the scum of society that nobody wants to deal with. God actually continued to pursue me during this time. There were people who would come to me and actually ask me to go to their church or maybe come to their Bible study. And I told all of them no. I told all of them I wasn't interested. And there was a point in my life, though, during that time where I decided that the next person who asks me, I'm going to say yes. And the reason I decided to change my mind was simply because what I had been doing wasn't working, right? I've tried everything and none of it has worked. None of it has been able to find the longing, fulfillment, impact, security that I wanted. And so what did I have to lose? And so I remember, coming to that conclusion. And then shortly sometime after that was when God placed Nick Stewart in my life. And we were in college classes together. It was our last year of college together. I'd never talked to him before this moment. We'd been in class for a while. I just didn't care to talk to him. And he would work out with me. We would go to the gym after class. We would go into sauna. And him and another classmate of mine, we would sit there and talk about God, or they would talk about God. And I would just kind of roll my eyes at them and give them the finger. I was like, you guys are full of it. This is stupid. This is whatever. And despite that, despite the attitude, despite my appearance, despite the way I acted, Nick asked me, would you like to come to my Bible study? And I said, yes. What do I have to lose? And it was when I went to that Bible study, it was definitely the first time that I started to see signs of God and things started to actually click for me, right? It was the first time I sat under a teaching where it was explained, where the Bible was actually read from the book itself and it was exposited, where it was talked about, where people discussed it. They gave reasons, evidence, history behind the text, enough for me to be like, okay, this is understandable. This is something I can get behind. It's not just somebody telling me, you should do this thing, you should believe in this, you should take this at just what I say. And then the next thing that really stood out to me at the Bible study was the fellowship of believers, like people who have a relationship with God, getting together and hanging out with each other. That was one of the most stark contrasts for me. As I was at the Bible study, I remember looking around the room. I saw people of all different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, people who were, broken, messed up, and it was odd. They actually cared about each other. The genuine authenticity they had, no matter how small the interaction it was, asking how somebody's life is going, what's going on in their life. They weren't there to just take for themselves, to be the center of attention. They weren't there to put on a fake facade and try and be the most popular person there. They actually were there to care about each other, to love each other. And that is one of the things I longed for, right? A place where I could be myself, a place where I didn't have to put up a bad dude defense, where I had to try and be something I didn't want to be. It wasn't until Nick and I started reading about the life of Matthew or the life of Paul, where Matthew used to be known as Levi and he was a tax collector. He was viewed as the scum of society, right? Nobody wanted anything to do with him. Or Paul, who was a persecutor of Christians, who had murdered Christians at the time. And yet God said to both of them, come and follow me. You're going to do my will. You're going to work for me. That flipped the script for me. That flipped everything upside down. That was the moment for me where I fully understood what God had done and that God wanted to know me, right? That when God came down and died on the cross, he didn't just die for the good people. He died for the people who are broken, the people who are messed up, people who are too far gone. He died for the people that we might look around and think they're the unlikelies. They're the people that would never come to know God, who had nothing to do with God. But he came for those people. He came for those people like me. And he died so that our wrongs could be forgiven, so that we can come into a relationship with him. That is when I fully understood that, God is good, he's just, he's righteous, but he's also loving, so loving, based on the extent he was going to go to for us. And so after we did that, we had been reading that in his car on OSU near like the RPAC, and it was in his car that I decided to start a relationship with God. I remember calling out to God. I asked for what he did on the cross to apply to me. I asked for him to come into my life. I remember very early on in my first month of God coming to know him I was like, God, I bet living for you isn't different. I bet living for you is going to be boring, that it's going to be unfulfilling, that I'm not going to be happy, that you are going to leave me like everybody else did, that you are going to betray me, that you are going to get tired of me, that you actually never really wanted anything to do with me. Or even your people. I bet you won't be any different than what it was like in the world without you, what it was like with society and culture. And I was like, even if I do exactly what you want me to do, I bet you it's going to be that way. And so, I had to own up to my part though. I wanted partly to be proved wrong by God, but I also, in my like cynical heart, was like, it's true. It's probably not going to be different. And so I did that though. I went all in for God. I was like, to see if this is true, I'm going to do everything he says just to make sure. I don't want any reservations. And so, I did what he wanted me to. I started handing over areas of my life that didn't align with him or his will. I started, serving other people, loving other people. I started teaching the Bible, studying, researching, discipling people, teaching, individuals about the Bible, sharing his gospel, and what he had done with other people. And during all those experiences, there wasn't a moment where I thought that those things were true. I think God had proven me wrong on every area. And he continued to do so, no matter what it was, even areas that I didn't think about. Out of all the ways I've lived my life, out of all the different things that I have tried and pursued to the fullest, none of them compared to the life I've had with God. The life I've had with God is the best and continues to be the best. The answers of where do I belong? What is my purpose here? What impact will I have on the world? What will I have to show for when I die? Where do I go when I die? He has answers to all those, and he's shown me and given me the answers to those. It seems like there's like a lot of unlikely people out there. It's easy to look at people and be like, he's scary, he's messed up, he's a partier, he's a druggie, he's this, he's that. God just uses people powerfully. You just don't really know how God's going to use them or how close they are to accepting God. A person's life might seem like it's all together, just like mine was, but once you start peeling away the layers, it's actually not put together. There's actually a longing there. There's a hole there. And so, if you're listening to this, I urge you to please give God a shot. Please give him a chance. Please try and go all out for him just to see if he can prove you wrong like he proved me wrong. And that's my story.